Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And welcome to Herbert Smith Freehills. I'm Matthew White. I'm the Joint Global Managing Partner for Real Estate here. As weeks go, this last 7 days has been pretty momentous. Herbert Smith Freehills won Legal Team of the Year at the Property Week Awards, which was great. But I understand there has been some other news. And I'm going to talk about that just to intro today. So the new Labour government has firmly placed planning at the heart of their growth. Yesterday, Rachel Reeves made the bold statement that the new government had done more to unblock the planning system in the last 72 hours than the last government had in 14 years. So what have they done? And what can we expect in the days and weeks ahead? The Chancellor said that Angela Rayner, who, by the way, I understand is going to be the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. So levelling up is, and local government is back in, and that renaming will come through in the next few days. Angela Rayner will be writing to planning authorities requiring them to review greenbelt boundaries to prioritise brownfield and greybelt land housing targets. This will free up development, allowing us to deliver thousands of affordable homes. Private sector investment will be unlocked through the creation of a National Wealth Fund, and the effective ban on onshore wind, new onshore wind, has already been scrapped. That is now in effect. Very soon, by the end of this month, in fact, we can expect to see a new draft NPPF that is likely to undo much of the last government's recent changes, including restoring mandatory housing targets. A task force will be created to accelerate stalled housing sites, with 4 such sites already identified. There will be a recruitment drive for 300 planning officers, funded by taxing foreign property buyers. And powers to call in applications or recover appeals will be used more proactively where it is warranted by the potential gain for the regional and national economies. Any investment opportunity with important planning considerations will be expected to be brought to the attention of the Chancellor and the Secretary of State. And I think that's with the implication that they're going to be saying yes rather more than they say no. Labour's manifesto said they will be building a new generation of new towns by creating a series of large-scale new communities across England. 1.5 million new homes will be delivered in the government's first 5 years. First 5 years, only 5 years, we'll see. A new towns code will require 40% affordable housing, 50% on those greenbelt sites, tree-lined streets, characterful design, good links to town and city centres, infrastructure first, including guaranteed public transport and public services. Angela Rayner said that they will start within the first year of the government and deliver the new towns within her first term. Now, that all seems very ambitious to me. Rachel Reeves has promised to support builders over blockers. That is music to our ears, I'm sure. But at the heart of the planning system is the need to resolve the difference between those who promote development and those who oppose it. There is no easy fix for this. In the UK, change, the mantra on which Labour rose to power, is too often interpreted, I think, as threat rather than opportunity. Zach Simons, if you don't know Zach, then look up his blog, which is excellent. His most recent blog reminded us of the wonderful 1948 case of Franklin and the Minister of Town and Country Planning. It is a must read in relation to new towns. It was the plans for Stevenage New Town. And the case records the planning minister, a certain Lewis Silkin, attending this public meeting. And he said, "While I will consult as far as possible all the local authorities affected, at the end, if people become fractious and unreasonable, I shall have to carry out my duty." At which point the judgment records that there was a loud shout from the audience of "Gestapo!" Now, whilst we might think that the planning meetings today are ill-behaved and unruly affairs, it seems as though it was ever thus. But perhaps there are some lessons here for the imposition of top-down planning, at least in terms of being forewarned what to expect. So it is likely that development corporations will be formed to implement the New Towns programme. They have definite advantages in terms of uniting plan making and development delivery roles, including CPO powers. And of course, we're seeing the removal of hope value CPO compensation as well. But will they have the vision to create thriving places with the infrastructure and the services that are required? That remains to be seen. And speaking as someone who grew up in Crawley, it's fair to say that the country's record in New Towns isn't that great. So what's not included in Labour's announcements today? Well, no third party or community right of appeal was announced, no root and branch review of the planning system, no direct mention of the return to regional plans, although a promise to return to cross-boundary strategic planning sounds very much like that. No renationalisation of utility companies, although there is a manifesto commitment to bringing British Railways under public ownership as and when existing contracts expire or are broken through a failure to deliver. And yesterday, Rachel Reeves said that the new policy intentions for critical infrastructure would be set out in the next few months, and that she will face up to opposition to her plans. And of course, they still need to sort out nutrient neutrality and water scarcity. One other thing that remains unclear is the extent to which the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 will be brought into force. So most of the provisions in that act are still awaiting commencement, including national development management policies. Now, I think Labour might consider those a gift from the previous Secretary of State as quite an attractive means of embedding widespread changes into the system. Labour have said they do not support the new infrastructure levy, so we can look forward to continue with SIL and Section 106 agreements for the foreseeable future. So I was a final seat trainee when Labour took power in 1997, and I remember it as a very optimistic time, helped no doubt by the fact I was still in my mid-20s. But Labour's approach to planning then was positive and proactive. Cool Britannia was around the corner. The development sector enjoyed a really strong period of growth. 27 years later, I'm not sure the conditions for growth or the grounds for optimism are quite as strong now, but it is interesting that the planning agenda has been Treasury-led to date, and Labour has been stringently promoting its business-friendly credential. So overall, I believe that the changes will be good for planning, good for real assets. And you never know. If England win the Euros, interest rates come down in the autumn, some of the causes of geopolitical instability are resolved, that could just unleash a tidal wave of positivity. And if we channel a little bit of Ed Davey, we could all surf that to 25 and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matthew, for that opening sort of scene setting and introduction. Sort of struggled to follow that, I think. Yeah, just to fully introduce myself, I'm Sam Benson, the Assistant Director for Planning at the BPF. And yeah, we're going to get into a panel shortly, but first we're going to provide a bit of a short overview of the BPF's planning manifesto published last month, put together by our planning committee and wider members as well. So get a clicker to work. There's the title page. Oh, there we go. I suppose, yeah, a bit of context first. Our planning manifesto is one of the many sort of policy-focused manifestos the BPF published this year in the run-up to the general election. So we first published the main BPF manifesto at the top there in January on behalf of the entire property sector, which sort of contains sort of very much high-level industry asks. And yeah, planning naturally featured heavily in that manifesto under our chapter on driving economic growth, and followed this spring and early summer. We also published 5 sector specific manifestos, I guess really to sort of provide that detailed policy work, more flesh on the bone, and yet our planning manifesto being one of those. And in addition, we published a a retail manifesto, a logistics manifesto, a net zero manifesto, and a housing manifesto. And yeah, fair to say also that planning featured across those documents as well. So yeah, moving on to the first recommendations from our planning manifesto. The first one was to introduce strategic planning to drive growth in the right locations. Yeah, as Matthew mentioned, I guess a sort of fair bit of the debate in the coming months will be, what form of strategic planning Labour might pursue, and what might that look like in practice. And yeah, our manifesto notes the various benefits of introducing a more strategic planning approach, including a more holistic approach to planning for housing, but also planning for employment sectors as well, such as industrial and logistics, which really benefit from that larger than local and sort of regional market perspective. And yeah, finally, our manifesto notes that an effective strategic planning mechanism would also allow local plans to get back to focusing on genuinely local issues. Onto the second recommendation, sort of broadly calling for a period of stability and sort of allowing our existing local plan system to get on with its job, really. I guess that's always a bit of a challenge with planning reform more generally, in terms of wishing to make fundamental policy changes to the planning system, and that perhaps causing confusion and uncertainty in terms of the operation of the existing system. I think that's certainly been a feature of the planning reform agenda over the previous Parliament from 2019 to 2024. And yeah, getting that delicate balance right will now naturally pass to the new Labour government. And yeah, we note the sort of current reform agenda of speeding up and making local plans more concise is sort of actually very much strongly supported from certain BPF members. But beyond sort of getting some form of strategic planning mechanism in place, the focus should very much be on getting local plans up to date rather than sort of tearing up the system. On to recommendation 3. So yeah, we're calling for more public and private sector investment into the planning system. So we're calling for more government investment into the planning system, which sort of very much recognises the planning system's role as a sort of crucial gateway to wider economic growth and regeneration, as well as more support from the private sector through enhanced service for larger schemes, and also the private sector to pay higher fees in return for a guaranteed level of service, and also through the private sector very much supporting important sort of third sector initiatives such as public practice as well. And yeah, I suppose on that sort of that wider industry piece, the BPF will be sort of funding and supporting across sector initiatives in collaboration with industry partners such as the RTPI, Planning Officer Society, the HBF, which is a sort of a cross-sector initiative which is sort of focused on sort of restoring the pride of planning and also looking at skills capacity. So yeah, hopefully that cross-sector initiative will be getting up and sort of developing its momentum over the coming months, and yeah, hopefully will play an important role now we've had in terms of the planning reform agenda and planning resource under the new government. The fourth recommendation, as Matthew sort of has already spoken about a little bit, we call for the infrastructure levy to sort of very much be scrapped, and the focus is instead to be on making Section 106 and the community infrastructure levy work much better. I guess, yeah, as Matthew said, given the general election result, that feels to be the general direction of travel with the infrastructure levy legislation on the statute through the Levelling Up Act, but it's nowhere near being operational. So yeah, this section of our manifesto sort of focuses on some principles of what a good system of developer contributions sort of might look like in practice. And yeah, some of them are listed on the slide there. The first one being a good system is flexible and responsive to local market conditions. A good system is clear about what the purpose of developer contributions should be, which to our mind and BPF members' mind is to mitigate the impact of development locally and enhance benefits to local communities, rather than, being perhaps spent on other council priorities which don't have anything directly to do with development, which was sort of previously at least consulted on through some of the infrastructure levy consultations. So we think that's a really important point. And finally, making sure there's this strong linkage between, paying the payment of the development contributions and then the delivery of the associated infrastructure in a timely fashion. Moving on to the next recommendation, need for a new conversation on the green belt, which sort of focuses on quality rather than the quantity of green belt. As sort of mentioned, sort of seems to be an agenda that Labour are already picking up and running with Rachel Reeves' speech earlier this week. And yeah, our manifesto notes the need to look at poorer quality aspects of the green belt, particularly those close to existing transport, which could play a vital role in easing the housing crisis. And we also call for a review of greenbelt land to enable, genuinely green land to be protected, whereas the sort of more appropriate greyer parts of the greenbelt to come forward for housing and employment as well. And as mentioned, I think this process has been kicked off earlier this week with the new, not Levelling Up Secretary, Housing Secretary Angela Rayner writing to authorities, or will be writing to authorities, to start reviewing their greenbelt boundaries locally. On to the final recommendation, and perhaps my colleague Ian will say a bit more about this during our panel because he's the expert. But yeah, we need to plan for all forms of housing need, such as purpose-built student accommodation, build-to-rent homes, and housing for older people, retirement living. I think the sort of key point in our manifesto that these housing sectors, they create more additionality in terms of the housing delivers with funding coming from the institutional investment sector. But these sectors deserve more support and definition through national planning policy, or then in turn to filter down into the local plan level as well. So I think that's the end of the presentation. Now we'll get on to the panel. I suppose, yes, so just to introduce the panel, Matthew, you've already introduced yourself, but we've got Nick Graham, Associate Planning Director at Peel, and also he's Vice Chair of our Planning Committee. Teresa Brewer, also a member of our Planning Committee, and the day job is Development Director at Landsec. And finally, Ian Fletcher, not a member of our Planning Committee, but who leads the BPF's policy team as Director of Real Estate. So I suppose to all panelists, I guess really first to start to ask for your general reactions to the contents of the manifesto. What bits did you sort of most identify with, and also to ask for your initial take on what the new Labour government might have in store for planning. What will they first focus on, and what can be done quickly? And I'll come to Nick first.
Thank you. Yeah, where to start? I mean, I identify with the manifesto obviously because I helped write it, so that's the easy way to answer that question. But for me, I mean, what we do at Peel, what I'm particularly involved in is strategic land promotion for residential development, as well as some employment. So, the reinstatement of housing targets, the getting back to a sensible position on greenbelt, and also really starting to think again about strategic planning are kind of all things that chime in particular with me. And I was really pleased to see Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday, and couldn't have written it better myself, I think, in a lot of ways. And it feels like Labour really are getting the fact that planning is effectively a technical profession and has been highly politicised in the last 5 or so years, and has been ruled by opinion and dogma to a greater extent than should have been permitted, really. to sort of see us get back to we're going to listen to the experts again, and we're going to, you know, tackle the blockages in the system is great, and feels like a bit of a call to arms for us. So it's obviously difficult, but will Labour really appear at the moment to be willing to make some difficult decisions? So yeah, I think it just feels like the start of a big change, which is great, and clearly the manifesto is having an impact, because we're seeing what we're asking for at the moment starting to be bedded back into the system.
Yeah. Very similar comments on the manifesto. I think it gives a really clear, really simple, very easy to understand for the new government key ask of what we as an industry need and require. Think we at Landsec and me, again, personally, were very pleased for once that the Chancellor was talking about development and really focusing on the power that we have in order to enable growth. I think for the last couple of years, we focused on the negatives of what our industry brings, and aligned, you know, sort of set up for there to be more ammunition between local communities and developers, and happy for us to sit in a box over here as the bad people, and really, from our perspective, welcome what Labour is saying. I think there is a fine line, though, between making sure that we do have enough space to listen to communities and to make sure that we put them at the centre of what we're bringing forward, because we spent a lot of time recently trying to work with local communities to get that right balance. And I think with the right support from Labour, encouraging local government and empowering planning officers, we can hopefully guide the process better so that we have the opportunity to make more positive change that meets the requirements of everyone. And key to that will be the reforms about how we link SIL and Section 106 closer to the developments, so that actually people can start to see that benefit coming forward. And I think really, if we could do anything in the next 4 years with Labour, it's about how we change that tide and how we work better together with them to make sure that we as an industry change our reputation, which will allow us to build more and build better and faster.
I'm going to start off with a thank you, because a few weeks ago we had a beautiful comms plan to issue our 5 manifesto across the summer, and of course planning on the basis of sort of October, November general election, and Rishi stood up, and Sam and the rest of the team probably had about all the manifestos about 2/3 done, so we had to sort of accelerate that somewhat, and so thank you to all the team. I think, in terms of Labour, clearly being very impressed with the emphasis on growth. I think there was RTPI figures out the other week that showed that improving planning could release 70 billion worth of growth into the economy over 10 years. So that is certainly a prize that's worth going after. I think that our manifesto probably sets out what our members have been telling us, which is to get some of the fundamentals right rather than radical reform. So things like resourcing, ensuring there's local plans in place, restoring housing targets, developer contributions, improving those, improving planning at a greater than local level, and one that's specific to us, which we'll probably get into, which is how to plan for rental housing. I suppose the corollary of that sort of messaging is just to try and ensure that we stop the tinkering, sort of 57 different varieties of permitted development rights, and seem to be on a sort of constant, almost conveyor belt of changes to the system. I suppose the concerns, one's been touched on already, which is just does that sort of change of culture at centre trickle down to a local level? Planning is still essentially a local function. I suppose the other sort of slightly longer term is just that will the sector keep faith with the government? Will the government keep faith with the sector? Housing numbers are not going to go instantly sort of bounce back, and therefore over the next 2 to 3 years, ensuring that both sides sort of keep faith, because the approach is not one that's radical, and you can see in sort of 2 to 3 years time it's not working. So some special advisor coming in and saying, we need to sort of shake up the planning system. as is the tendency. So yeah, just trying to keep faith with each other. Yeah, to that extent, it's been promising even over the last sort of few days. The new government looking at specific sites and seeing how it can unlock those, so we start to at least see some of those numbers coming through early.
Is it? Matthew, anything to?
Yeah, so I have to say I've become very cynical. Every new Secretary of State would come in and talk about planning reform and say we're going to streamline the system, make it faster, higher, stronger, whatever it is. I literally stopped reading the changes they were announcing, which makes me a bad lawyer. But they just weren't doing anything. Half of them weren't even introduced. I never really understood how the planning system could simultaneously be the cause and the cure of all the UK's problems. But that is kind of what it became. This is different. This feels like planning reform with substance, not just dogma. So I agree with what's already been said, and the BPF's planning manifesto is part of that. These are grown-up plans, and that's really exciting. So yeah, I do feel optimistic rather than cynical, which is great.
Yeah, it sort of seems like our planning committee has been therapy at 5 years. Few planning committee members in the committee. So second question, very much it feels like the Labour Party are going to be going down the incremental change, legislation changes to policy, rather than any sort of initial planning bill, primary legislation, which might come in time. Actually, it does take time still to consult on changes to policy. Consultation is naturally needed. So I guess the second question is, how long do you think it will be until we see a change planning policy environment on the ground, that crucially filtering down into decision making? It's my second question. Nick.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I mean, I think the rhetoric is really important. I think we'll see that change. It feels immediate to me that we've got a government that's willing to go out there and not be apologetic and to say we are making difficult decisions and we expect the industry to react to that. I think that's really important for us as professionals in the private sector, but it's also important for the public sector to hear that message that they are being sort of re-empowered after years of probably not being listened to the same degree. And it's someone said 18 months ago about we need to make planning sexy again, and I'm not sure planning's ever been sexy, but I think that message of it is a profession that you can work in and make a difference, and that is more crucial than any sort of individual policy that they're going to announce, because we have to get more people into this profession, particularly in the public sector, if we're going to really sort of tackle the big issues. On the sort of policy and stuff, Labour have been pretty clear making decisions effectively on day 3. We're expecting to see NPPF at the end of the month. They said they'll consult over the summer. It'll be in by the autumn alongside written ministerial statements. So I think a lot of the big ticket items that we've been asking for are going to be very, very quick. The question I've got is around what does the kind of longer term plan look for? Because everything that Labour have said they're going to do really is kind of policy and written ministerial statements. That will happen fast. It's kind of what happens from sort of month 3 onwards. What level of reform are they planning? Feels a little bit clear at the moment.
Really welcomed by the speed of the NPPF from our perspective, but I do think there is a need to make sure that whilst change is needed, change is focused on the bits that are needed now rather than dragging it out. You touched upon a minute ago how many conversations we've had at the planning committee, and actually how many additional requirements we've had or changes we've had. I would like to say lumped, but I've tried to find a nicer word, lumped on us. And actually the time that it takes to pull together a planning application and to work on these schemes, the policy context over the last 5 years has completely changed, but also it's completely layered up, which increases the number of fees, it increases the level of confusion, and most importantly, it makes the system more and more inefficient. It also creates extra barriers and extra workload for a system that is already under-resourced. So I think that really from my personal preference and ask would be that we look at trying to stabilise the system as much as possible, but also we look to make changes that we can simplify the system. We can delayer the conflicting requirements. We can simplify the information that's required so that we don't end up submitting planning applications with tens of thousands of pages of documents that no one will ever look at, and we move away from a tick box exercise that empowers the officers to be able to make the right decisions, and that is led from the top but also led by a culture change, and in turn hopefully that will also lead to there being able to be more pride in the profession, but actually also freeing up officers' times to actually do the job that they need to do, rather than validating planning applications that take them 3 to 4 weeks because they've got to check that every single page is there. So
is there Ian, anything to follow from that?
I think I'm very optimistic. We've seen Sam and I over the last sort of 4 to 5 months, the civil service planning for a change of regime, and therefore I think putting in the hard yards to have those files ready for when new ministers arrive. So as has been said before by Matthew, surfing the moment, continuing that sort of that inertia, I think is really important. We've got a really good director of planning at the moment in Will Bergen, and a really good chief planner in Joanna Averley. I suppose something that I've sort of seen over several governments now is just that the talking about intervening and actually intervening are two very different things. And I can remember going out to Reading, gosh, many years ago with Yvette Cooper when she was planning minister. She was going to intervene, and it didn't really materialise. Sajid Javid had been taken to Bristol. He was going to intervene, and it didn't materialise. And then we saw, I think, Michael Gove in December of last year threatening to intervene in local plans, and perhaps through reasons of sort of election purdas not getting there. But just seeing that sort of intervention actually taking place, and then as Nick has mentioned, the other sort of big question for me is around resourcing. We were discussing over coffee. I'm the only private sector person, I think, at the Planning Officers Society's conference on Friday this week, asked to talk about reviving public sector planning. And I can talk very optimistically about the relationship that our members have with public sector planners, some of the great things they're doing, but when it comes to resourcing, I'm not sure I've got any silver bullets. That's going to be something that's going to take time to turn around. So just continuing to work at that.
I agree very strongly with that resourcing point. There's no substitute for just making sure that the system is properly resourced to handle things. But on change, I mean, change, I think it will happen quickly. So we've already seen the moratorium on onshore wind has been removed. You can do a lot through the MPPF, and that's going to be coming out in draft this month. You can do a lot through ministerial statements. So I think it will be quick action. The one word of warning I would say from reading the plans is that they are talking about bringing more planning into the NSIP regime, the DCO regime. And my planning partner here, Catherine Howard, has been quite outspoken about not doing that, because that system is itself quite unwieldy, and it could end up that things that go through that system actually end up taking longer than they do through the current system. So I'd be wary of doing that. I think we need to make the system we have for town and country planning work more efficiently, and if that means using recovered appeals and call-ins, fine. But I don't think the answer is using the NSIP regime, because it's become unwieldy.
Thanks, Matthew. Strategic planning. Obviously, we've got an ask in there in our manifesto, and probably one of the recommendations where there was the most discussion in terms of what it should look like in practice. Obviously, Labour have committed to a strategic planning mechanism was I think the term that was used in the manifesto. But I guess I want to really sort of flesh out what might this look like in practice. Is it going to be the return of full fat strategic planning with return of structure plans, or measures as we call for in the manifesto through national policy? And turning to Nick first, obviously with great lot of experience with the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, the views on strategic planning from that sphere.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so the Greater Manchester Plan was beneficial because it allowed, for all the reasons set out in the manifesto, strategic planning is good because it allows large and local decisions, cross-boundary issues to be resolved. But crucially, it kind of enabled councils to make decisions around where growth would be in a sphere that was slightly removed from the local level, so they could effectively point to someone else and say, we have to do this because we're part of this strategic plan. So local politicians could defer a bit of the blame away from themselves. I think there's kind of two routes for strategic plans at the moment, and it's either an STS, which is what London is, which was the mayor's sole responsibility, but crucially couldn't allocate land because legislation doesn't allow it to, or the Manchester version, which is effectively a joint local plan for every council and stitched together into one big plan. You can allocate land, which is great, and I think is critical, because otherwise what's the point of a strategic plan if it's just setting a general direction? We'd have to wait years for then a local plan to actually do the allocations. But the big problem with the Manchester plan was that every council had to vote to adopt it, and every stage of the plan, whether it was going out to consultation, Reg 18, Reg 19, submission, consultation on modifications, then adoption, there was always a risk if one council doesn't vote to approve it, it falls down. And that did happen at one point, where one council pulled out and they managed to kind of put a sticking plaster over it and keep going. So I think, the London model is preferred because it's much more politically stable, but there needs to be some changes to legislation to allow it to actually allocate land and provide for growth. Otherwise, it's a bit of a, it sets the general direction, but we'd have to wait a lot longer for the actual releases.
Teresa, anything to add?
Oh, the Manchester one sounds quite good. Of what you said. I think we're hugely supportive at Landsec of the concept of strategic plans. I think our watch out or our concern is that it becomes overly onerous, and again, saying the same thing again, but another layer. Time and time again, we're conflicted by different requirements, and I think key to this is making sure that the resource is put where it's needed, and making sure that we can simplify the system and strategic plans remain strategic rather than really specifying specifics up to the level that we've got at the moment, where we're mixing building regulations in with things as well. So really supportive in terms of making sure that we can ensure the investment and that certain areas are prioritised, and I think that that's the key for us in making sure that comes through.
Teresa, yeah.
Just to really emphasise that point, that I think, and we've seen that sort of playing out over the last few months in the London context with the Mayor and the Secretary of State at sort of loggerheads about release of strategic industrial land for housing purposes. So trying to ensure that we don't have a sort of a national plan, as it were. So there's potential for those sorts of conflicts. Trying to avoid those.
Planning does require you to plan, and that doesn't respect arbitrary boundaries. So I think the need to plan across boundaries is very important, and the duty to cooperate hasn't worked. Anyone who has children, you can't just say to them, why can't you play nicely? It doesn't work. So I think there has to be some imposition of those more regional plannings. I agree with Teresa. I think it can go too far. I think the London plan is about twice as long as it should be, and we need to kind of pare that back a bit. But that's not a reason not to plan strategically.
I've heard that reference before, which is, I think it's relevant. I suppose some questions to specific panel members. Come to Teresa first on brownfield. Yeah, our planning manifesto doesn't cover brownfield specifically, but we do in the main BPF manifesto. I know Landsec and BL, British Land, has been a particularly active sort of policy area for both your organisations this year. So I guess the question is, how can we sort of best promote brownfield land and sort of overcome the key challenges? And I guess also picking up that London piece, any London specific issues which could help get development moving quicker in the capital.
Yeah, thanks. So firstly, yesterday was quite good with Rachel Reeves actually mentioning brownfield. I think the policies and the sort of discussion before the election really sort of focused on their new towns concept. So I think that that is key in terms of making sure that we can prioritise brownfield sites. We all are sort of familiar in London with talking about brownfield, but actually there are many different types of brownfield land, and how we make sure they come forward is going to be key, because the prioritisation of that definition within the new NPPF should be should really enable this, but it should also make sure that we can enable the right infrastructure to unlock these sites. Most of the sites, brownfield sites that are left at the moment because there are issues, be that shopping centres that everyone's looking at the moment and working out how they come forwards with their complex nature, or our site in Manchester next to the station that has huge contamination issues because of its historic issues, and how you make sure that you can work together to bring those forwards, and really the understanding of what that means, and how these aren't just pieces of land that look like they're well connected, but actually the burden that comes with them and the challenges to bringing forward development on that. And I think in partnership with that, we need to be able to partner better with local authorities, but also with the government for the long-term outcomes, because these schemes are, are not short. Even to get planning these days, it's taking up to 5 years, and then that's before you've tried to unlock the site for delivery, and the huge amount of cost in terms of making sure that it's ready for development, but also that point coming in again yesterday, time and time again, with the need for infrastructure, and understanding again, hopefully with those strategic plans, where we can make sure that we can plan for infrastructure to come in. And actually there is a need for public partnerships and funding and real conversations, because build costs are going up, inflation is going up, but prices really aren't going anywhere, and there's still this mistrust in the industry. Rachel Reeves said something I wrote down yesterday, but I can't remember the exact line, but tricky developers or something like that, when she was talking about contributions. And really, actually, we need to have a meaningful conversation, about how challenging these sites are to bring forward, how much it does actually cost, and how when you pay still, the moment you put a spade in the ground, you still don't get anything for another 5 years, and you're carrying that. And what we need to do is find a way of actually working together and looking at specific brownfields. Maybe there's a way of selecting a few strategically across the country that can bring forward the most, and using them as case studies to learn and to teach everyone in a joint learning, that actually no one's trying to pull something off. Actually, everyone's just trying to work and come forward and bring forward these development sites. And so I think that's where we need to work together. We need to look at tax incentives. We need to look at different ways of working it, which overall everyone will get the same benefit. But actually, it's about how we phase things, how we look at things, and how we bring them forwards. On London specifically, there's lots of sites that I think all of us have probably seen, where they might be in a great location, so therefore everyone thinks that they've got a fantastic land value and fantastic potential. But actually, we need to start thinking about how tricky these are. Shopping centres are a really good example. We've got O2 Finchley Road and Lewisham Shopping Centre within Landsec ourselves that we're looking at bringing forward master plans on. But how you and BL as well at Canada Water, these are huge long-term moving feasts, where you have to deal with not only your traditional residents of the neighbouring areas, but actually your shoppers and your existing uses on the site, and how you pull together those jigsaws and the type of infrastructure that's required. Actually, until you get into the weeds of it, is actually quite easy to underestimate, even from our perspective. So we would really welcome how we work together on a simplification of the system again. And I use the term simplification. I'm not talking about reducing the number of reports or reducing the number of information. It's about making sure that we prioritise and that we work with local government and the Mayor of London to make sure that everything is a compromise, and how do we prioritise that we get the best for London and the best for the local communities. And so that's about having a meaningful discussion about whether we need 80% or 100% dual aspect, or would you actually prefer 100 more affordable homes? Because actually that's what time and time again we're getting into, is this trade-off between actually what's best, because we've got this layering of policy that's coming forwards time and time again. So from our perspective, that's some of the ways that I think we can promote brownfield, but not all of the answers, because I think wherever we're looking at it, be it in our site in Manchester, be it in our site in London, actually we need a re-education piece, and we need to work together to explain the challenges, because when you look at it on the face of it, it looks like it should be really simple, but it's not.
Teresa. Moving on to Ian, I teed you up for this question. Last recommendation, the planning manifesto is sort of very much around planning for other forms of housing, such as build to rent, student housing for older people. Just wondered if you wanted to expand on any of that.
Yeah, Sam, thanks, Sam. We put in a submission recently to civil servants on that, seeking to influence this consultation that will be out on in the next month on the NPPF. It's tricky. Paragraph 63 of the NPPF sets out quite clearly that local planning authorities should be planning for the diversity of different needs in their locality. I think the wording is sort of they should assess and plan for, and certainly the assessment generally gets done. If you look at most SHMAs now, they will take into account a consideration of need for older people's housing or build to rent and other rental housing and student accommodation. The bit that seems to sort of fail at the moment is then translating that into actual local plan policies and that getting translated into sort of site allocations. And you can strengthen the wording in the NPPF, but only to a point. The challenge, I think, as much is ensuring that when a local plan gets to examination stage, that planning inspectors are raising questions about why that sort of SHMA assessment is not getting translated into plans. I looked at my local authority local plan the other day. SHMA showed that there was a 35% growth in the private rented sector. There was no policies in the local plan to accommodate that, because they're under pressure on housing numbers as it is. And then there are improvements that could also be made to planning practice guides. And I suppose the tricky bit is, as something you can remember, the NPPF being brought in sort of 2010, and the whole rationale was to try and keep it simple. But I think sectors that have sort of come in since then, like build to rent, now have about sort of 6-7 paragraphs of planning practice guidance. You sort of probably avoided the sort of the cull of previous planning practice, whereas other sectors that were there already, such as student accommodations, just a sort of paragraph in a wider sort of narrative, and doesn't really sort of get the attention I don't think it deserves. Planning practice guidance, and when you think of some of the changes in that sector that have taken place over the last 40 years, probably deserves more than that. So there are, I think, changes that could be made to planning practice guidance, NPPF, to support those sectors. But also, I think possibly the biggest change is just getting that questioning at the inspection stage. And we've reached out to the planning inspectorate. Doesn't like to be influenced. But we've tried to sort of educate it on logistics, and similar exercises is needed on the rental sectors.
We've got about sort of 5 to 10 minutes left, so this is the point of the seminar where I come to the audience and ask if there's any questions. I think we're on a smaller side, so I'm not sure we've got a microphone, but if anyone's got a question to ask the panel, if not, I've got a couple more questions I can ask. Any questions? Yeah, gentleman at the front.
Peter Bovell, Montague Evans. I don't know who this is for, maybe all of you. It strikes me that 300 planning officers, new planning officers, isn't that ambitious. I mean, that's not even one every local authority. You could have made that 3,000. I appreciate maybe they want to cost it. They want to cost it. You could easily put planning application fees up to me. I don't know what your thoughts are about ambitions in terms of, if we agree that resourcing is required, is 300 officers the answer?
definitely not. You need 5 times that many, it still wouldn't make the difference it needs to. For me, they need to ring fence fees. You know, they said they would ring fence the 35% uplift, and then they didn't. Planning is effectively subsidising other parts of council budgets at the moment, so they need to start ring fencing. It's difficult because obviously that has then an impact on another part of the council's budget. So the government needs to work through how it can ring fence without having that negative impact on something else. But yeah, they need to ring fence because at the moment you just don't get the service you pay for.
In our Landsec Bramfield paper, we actually said that we would pay more, but it based on targets and certainty. And actually, I think again, in terms of upskilling and making sure that we can create pride in a profession, I think that that's going to be key, because you will attract the right talent if we're actually paying them appropriately and upskilling them, and and I think that that's the key. So from our perspective, and the joint paper with BL and with Berkeley, that's fundamental. Is I think the industry will pay, but we have to pay for a service that we're getting, and it has to be target linked.
I just I think the good points have already been made in terms of 300 is not enough. You're at the point in the political cycle, I suppose, where you're trying to encourage, and 300 nothing, but we'd like more. I suppose the huge challenge in this arena is just where are those people, and there are some good schemes that the previous governments put in place, more money going to public practice, trying to support more graduates to come through the system, but all of that is that dilemma for my speech on Friday. There's not that silver bullet, I don't think, and it is a case of just plugging away.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Could you do secondments in private practice? Would that create conflicts? I don't
We get secondments in Manchester at the moment from strategic, combined authorities. They've started recruiting externally delivery managers and program managers, and then putting those into councils on big projects. That really helps, but it does require a strategic authority that also has some money to fund that sort of stuff.
Any more questions from the floor? On the back, James.
Yeah, James Parchester, GA. Just wondering if there's scope to promote the idea of this sort of triple tenure as a standard model for schemes over a certain size. So, what I have in mind is obviously, although it's great that we've got an enthusiasm about building more homes, that the political language is still around home ownership and social rent, and the bit in the middle is still being ignored. I kind of get that in terms of the election campaign and the simple messages, but we've got to be a bit more nuanced now. And maybe a way of doing that is to acquire schemes over a certain size, perhaps to explicitly provide for some sort of rental or alternative housing within it, alongside the other two primary tenures, and maybe that would unless I suppose evidence can be shown otherwise. But I think in most cases evidence will be that the actual rental is required and should be provided up front. How do we get the message across?
Yeah, no, James, that's a good point, and one that was in our submission this past week on the NPPF, just to try and support that recommendation that was first made by Oliver Letwin, and then was followed up, I think, was early this year, the Competition Markets Authority's market study of house builders. So that's certainly in our submission. I think it's something that would help in terms of accelerating delivery on those larger sites, and seemed to grasp the support of not only those organisations but others. And so something we'd like to see.
Just add to that, I mean, I would like to see more public sector housing being built. I think that is the only way we're going to really make a difference. I think we have a bizarre system where you rely on developers as kind of the primary people to build affordable housing. We don't do that in any other. We don't say to BMW, every 100 BMWs you build, by the way, 50 have to be buses. And you have to give £1 million to the local hospital because of the crashes and £500,000 for roads. So, you know, we do need a bit more of a grown-up conversation on the model for housing in this country. And I think we need to build more housing and maybe even restrict right to buy, because there's more social housing going out of the system than there is coming in.
I'll probably make this the last question, but yeah, keen to sort of, I guess, look back and revisit not the existing, the previous planning agenda. And obviously it's been a busy time, particularly the last year and a half, 2 years on planning reform. And if any panelists had any comments on any aspects of the agenda from 2019 to 2024, which might merit being continued. I think, you know, there was some stuff on reviewing statutory consultees and making them sort of more joined up and more resource, which I think the industry broadly welcomes. But anything which is worth for the new government to pick up and run with as well, Ian, feel free to say absolutely nothing.
Actually, Sam, I'm quite on the contrary view. I think new governments come in and sort of trash the work of their predecessors, and actually there was some good things that the previous government was doing. I suppose the one that I'd like to see get across the line particularly was they brought a group of experts together on older people's housing task force. I think that would make a number of sort of planning recommendations. We are, as a nation, absolutely lousy in terms of giving older people choice in their old age as to a variety of different housing. I think the sort of retirement community that we deliver about 7,000 units a year, and most of our contemporaries are delivering something like 50,000 a year. So, you know, there's huge scope there to, I think, make people's lives better in old age if they want to move into something that's a bit more specialist. And let's hope the task force survives to see another day.
Other panelists, anything for the existing?
I mentioned national development management policies, which I think are a good idea. They could slim down local plans. I think the best thing they did was digitisation of planning, and that is a really, really powerful agenda that we need to be pushing through. It could revolutionise the way we deal with planning and stop us all trying to search through PDFs when the technology does exist to search more easily for things. So yeah, that's a good thing and should be carried on.
And echo that as well. National development management policies could have a really big impact on resource and getting plans done quicker. Similarly, than the sticking to 30 months. Streamlined, quick plans that get reviewed regularly. You know, good idea.
I've got nothing to add.
It's about time.
All right. Well, I think we're just coming up to the end of our time, so I think we'll conclude the seminar there. I suppose just to sum up, certainly continue to be a busy time with the NPPF consultation expected by the end of this month. I think quite a few of the sectors probably going to be reading it from their holidays from the beach, myself included. So yeah, we're looking forward to that. I suppose thanks to everyone involved in producing the BPF planning manifesto, the members of the planning committee in particular. And yeah, certainly it seems exciting time on the planning front. Planning certainly never stands still. So yeah, just finally to thank everyone for attending, and I invite you to thank the panel in the usual way.